The day everything felt wrong. The first thing I remember is the silence. Not the peaceful kind. The heavy kind. The kind that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. My daughter was sitting beside me, her small hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor like it had personally offended her. She didn't cry. That scared me more than anything else. Because my daughter always cried. She cried when she fell. She cried when she was scared. She cried when something hurt. But that day she was quiet. And that's when I knew something was wrong. I looked at her again, really looked this time. Her face was pale. Too pale. The kind of pale that doesn't come from being tired but from something deeper. Something hidden. Are you okay? I asked softly. She nodded. Too fast. Parents know this moment. That tiny lie kids tell when they don't want to worry you. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But my stomach twisted in a way it never had before. Just a few hours earlier, I had dropped her off like I always did. Same place. Same people. Same smiles that now felt fake in my memory. Everything was supposed to be normal. It wasn't. When we got home, she went straight to her room without saying a word. No running. No stories about her day. No laughter. I followed her quietly. That's when I saw it. A bruise. Hidden just below her sleeve. My heart stopped. I knelt down in front of her slowly, like I was afraid she might break if I moved too fast. Where did that come from? I asked. She didn't answer. I asked again, this time firmer. Her lips trembled. Her eyes filled up, but she still didn't cry. Instead, she whispered something that would replay in my head for weeks. They said, "I shouldn't tell you." That sentence changed everything. Because no adult should ever tell a child to keep secrets from their parent. Ever. I felt something rise in me. Not anger yet. Something colder. Sharper. A quiet promise forming without words. Who said that? I asked. She shook her head. I didn't push. Not yet. I hugged her instead. Held her tighter than I ever had before. I could feel her heartbeat racing against my chest. That night she barely ate. She barely slept. And neither did I. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of that morning. Every smile. Every "she's fine." Every reassuring nod. They all felt wrong now. The next day I did what any parent would do. I went back. I walked into that building with calm on my face and fire in my chest. I didn't accuse. I didn't shout. I just asked simple questions. What happened yesterday? Why is my daughter hurt? Why didn't anyone call me? They smiled. That's what shocked me most. They smiled like nothing had happened. One of them leaned forward and said, "Children exaggerate. Sometimes they hurt themselves and forget how." I looked straight at them. "My daughter doesn't forget pain," I said. Another voice joined in, calm and confident. We reviewed everything. There was no incident. No incident. That word echoed in my head. Because I had seen the bruise. I had seen the fear. I had heard the whisper. Someone was lying. And it wasn't my daughter. I left that meeting feeling smaller than when I walked in. Not because I was weak, but because I realized something terrifying. They were united. They were calm. And they were covering something up. That night my daughter finally broke. She cried so hard she couldn't speak at first. When the words came, they came out tangled and broken. She told me about the fall. About the shouting. About how no one helped her at first. About how someone told her to be quiet, or she'd get in trouble. My hands were shaking by the time she finished. I promised her I would fix it. But deep down I didn't know how. Because how do you fight a wall of adults who all agree on one lie? I didn't know it yet. But the answer was already waiting for me. Hidden. Recorded. Silent. And when it finally played, everything would change. The lie they all agreed on. The next morning I woke up with a headache that felt like it had been building all night. Not from lack of sleep but from thinking. Thinking about their smiles. Their calm voices. The way they all used the same words in the same order like they had practiced them. No incident. That phrase wouldn't leave me alone. My daughter sat at the table, quietly pushing her food around. Every now and then she'd glance at me, like she was checking if I was still there. Like she needed to be sure I hadn't disappeared overnight. "Are you going to talk to them again?" she asked. "Yes," I said without hesitation. But this time I'm listening. She nodded. That was all she needed. When I arrived again, the tone was different. Not hostile. Not warm either. Polite. Careful. The kind of politeness people use when they're guarding something. They invited me into a small office. Same people as before. Same calm faces. One of them started talking before I could even sit down. We've discussed this internally, she said. And we're confident nothing serious happened. Confident. I noticed how she didn't look at me when she said it. I asked them to explain the bruise. They said my daughter must have bumped into something. I asked why no one called me. They said they didn't think it was necessary. I asked why my daughter was told not to tell me. They exchanged glances. That's a misunderstanding, someone said quickly. Every answer felt smooth. Too smooth. Like they had been sanded down until there were no sharp edges left. No emotion. No hesitation. That's when I realized what they were doing. They weren't just denying it. They were rewriting it. I leaned forward. So you're saying my daughter imagined everything? No one answered directly. We're saying children can misinterpret situations. One of them replied. That's when something inside me snapped. Not loudly. Not visibly. But permanently. I stood up. If you're wrong, I said calmly, and I find out later, what happens then? They assured me nothing like that would occur. I walked out knowing one thing for certain. They believed they had one. For the next few days I watched closely. I listened more than I spoke. Every interaction felt staged. Every response delayed just enough to sound thoughtful. And then something strange happened. My daughter said, "Daddy, they changed." What do you mean? They're nicer. But it feels fake. That sentence hit me hard. Because children feel truth before they understand it. That night, while putting her jacket away, something fell out of her pocket and slid across the floor. A small device. Picked it up. A recording tag. My heart skipped. She looked at me nervously. I forgot I had that. Where did you get it? I asked. She shrugged. They told us to wear them sometimes. Sometimes. I stared at it for a long moment. And for the first time since this all started, I felt hope. Because lies don't like records. And whatever they were hiding, it was about to speak. The recording no one expected. I stood there holding that small device like it was something fragile. Something dangerous. Something alive. It didn't look like much. No flashing lights. No warning signs. Just a small dull piece of plastic that could fit in the palm of my hand. But my chest felt tight. Like I already knew what was inside it. Did you turn this on? I asked my daughter gently. She shook her head. They said it turns on by itself. That answer chilled me. Because if it turned on by itself, then it didn't choose what to hear. It heard everything. I waited until she was asleep that night. Not because I wanted to hide anything from her, but because I didn't want her to hear it again. Whatever was inside that device didn't belong to her anymore. It was mine to carry now. I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, but my thoughts were loud. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to place the device down just to steady myself. I stared at it for a long time. There are moments in life when you know you're standing at a line. Once you cross it, there's no going back. No pretending. No, maybe I misunderstood. This was one of those moments. I pressed play. First, there was nothing. Just noise. Shuffling. Voices far away. My heart sank. Then, a voice. Clear. Sharp. Familiar. Sit down. You're making a big deal out of nothing. My daughter's voice came next. Smaller. Shaky. I can't move my arm. I felt my throat close. Another voice responded. Firm. Cold. You're fine. Don't cry. If your parent finds out, this will be your fault. I stood up so fast the chair fell backward. Every word felt like it was being spoken directly to me. Like someone had reached through time and grabbed me by the collar. The recording continued. Footsteps. Someone sighing impatiently. A laugh that didn't belong there. Just tell them you fell. I slammed my hand on the table. There it was. Not confusion. Not exaggeration. Not imagination. A plan. A choice. They chose silence over my daughter. I stopped the recording and sat down again, my head in my hands. I wasn't crying. I couldn't. I felt hollow, like something had been scooped out of my chest and replaced with fire. They hadn't just failed her. They had controlled her. I replayed it. Again. And again. Each time I noticed something new. The confidence in their voices. The lack of concern. The way they spoke like this wasn't the first time. That scared me most of all. Because if they could do this once, how many times had they done it before? The next morning I didn't confront anyone. I didn't make calls. I didn't raise my voice. I watched. I paid attention to how quickly messages were returned now. How carefully words were chosen. How often people checked their surroundings before speaking. They knew something had shifted. They just didn't know what. My daughter asked me, "Did you find anything?" I knelt beside her and looked her straight in the eyes. "Yes," I said. "And you were very brave." She smiled a small smile. The kind that doesn't reach the eyes but tries anyway. That smile became my fuel. Still, I didn't rush. Because truth doesn't need speed. It needs timing. I backed everything up. More than once. Different places. Different formats. I learned how easily things can disappear when people feel threatened. I also learned something else. When systems protect themselves, they don't panic. They prepare. And that's exactly what they started doing. Meetings behind closed doors. Emails that suddenly stopped including me. Policies quoted that I had never heard before. They were building a wall. They didn't realize I already had the key. One evening I received a message. "Can we talk? Just you and me." It was from one of them. The calm one. The confident one. I agreed. We met in the same small office. Same chairs. Same calm tone. But this time they looked tired. "We want to move forward," they said carefully. "For everyone's sake." "For whose sake?" I asked. They paused. "Your daughter's." I leaned back and listened. They offered apologies that didn't admit anything. Solutions that solved nothing. Promises without names. And then they said something they thought would end it. "There's no proof." I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was over. I didn't say anything. I just reached into my pocket and placed the device on the table between us. Their face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. The calm cracked. The silence stretched. I stood up. "I'll be in touch," I said. And for the first time since this began, I wasn't afraid. Because the truth had been waiting quietly. And now it was ready to speak. When silence turned into fear, silence has a sound when you listen closely. It hums in unanswered messages. It sits heavy in rooms where conversations suddenly stop when you walk in. It hides behind polite words that don't mean what they say. After I placed that device on the table, everything changed. But nothing was said. And that was the most frightening part. No calls. No explanations. No apologies. Just silence. At first, I wondered if they were hoping I would doubt myself. That I would second-guess what I heard. That time would soften the truth until it felt less sharp. They didn't know me. Every day I noticed small things. A meeting rescheduled for later. Emails answered with short sentences instead of warm ones. Rules suddenly quoted word for word, like shields held up in front of faces. They weren't ignoring me. They were adjusting. My daughter felt it too. "Why is everyone quiet now?" she asked one evening. I didn't answer right away. I pulled her close and brushed her hair back gently. "Sometimes," I said carefully, "people get quiet when they're scared." "Scared of what?" she asked. I looked at her and chose honesty, but softly. "Scared of the truth." She didn't fully understand. But she nodded anyway. Children don't always need explanations. They need safety. And I was determined to give her that. A few days later, I received another message. This one was different. It wasn't polite. It was careful. "We want to resolve this without complications." Without complications. That word told me everything. I replied simply, "I want the truth on record." There was a long pause before the response came. "That may not be necessary." That's when I knew. They weren't afraid of me being loud. They were afraid of me being precise. I started writing everything down. Dates. Times. Who said what. Who avoided eye contact. Who suddenly changed their tone when my name was mentioned. I learned something important during those days. Fear doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like control. They began offering solutions that required silence. Quiet arrangements. Closed-door conversations. For the sake of moving on. Moving on from what? From accountability. One evening, someone I barely knew approached me quietly. You should be careful, they said, not looking directly at me. Careful of what? I asked. They hesitated. Pushing too hard. I smiled. Not kindly. I'm not pushing, I said. I'm standing. They walked away without another word. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because my mind was racing. I realized something then. They were waiting for me to make a mistake. To raise my voice. To accuse publicly without preparation. To act on emotion instead of strategy. I didn't give them that. Instead, I became quieter. And that scared them more. I noticed how quickly people started documenting conversations when I entered a room. How often policies were suddenly reviewed. How phrases like procedure and protocol were repeated like prayers. They were building a story. One where they followed rules. One where nothing unusual happened. One where my daughter's pain was reduced to paperwork. But stories fall apart when facts don't match. And I had facts. My daughter asked me one night, "Are we in trouble?" I sat beside her and held her hands. "No," I said firmly. "We're protected." "By who?" I smiled gently. "By the truth." She thought about that for a moment. "Is the truth strong?" "Yes," I said. "Stronger than fear." The next day I received an invitation. Not a request. An invitation. A formal meeting. More people this time. Higher voices. Serious faces. They were escalating. Good. Because escalation means pressure. And pressure reveals cracks. As I prepared, I felt something unexpected. Calm. Not the kind that comes from confidence, but the kind that comes from clarity. I wasn't chasing justice anymore. I was carrying it. They still believed silence was their shield. They didn't realize silence was now their weakness. Because when silence turns into fear, it's only a matter of time before someone speaks. And when they do, everything changes. The meeting they tried to control the room was larger than the last one. That was the first thing I noticed. Bigger table. More chairs. A glass wall that made everything inside look official, important, untouchable. They wanted this meeting to feel heavy, to feel final. They wanted me to feel small. I didn't. I arrived early. Not to impress anyone but to observe. I watched how people entered the room. Who avoided eye contact. Who smiled too quickly. Who sat where. Power leaves patterns if you're patient enough to notice them. They filed in one by one. Faces I recognized. Faces I didn't. Some looked confident. Others looked tired. A few looked nervous even before the meeting began. That told me everything. Someone cleared their throat. "Thank you for coming," a voice said. Calm. Practiced. I nodded but didn't respond. They started with rules. Time limits. Order of speaking. Notes would be taken. Everything recorded. Officially. I smiled to myself. Recorded. They talked about values. Safety. Procedures. All the right words arranged carefully like decorations. Not one of them mentioned my daughter by name. Not yet. When they finally did, it was brief. Reduced to phrases like the situation and the concern. I waited. Then came the part they thought would control me. They showed me documents. Reports. Statements that all said the same thing in different ways. No wrongdoing. No evidence. Case closed. They slid the papers across the table like a verdict. "This is our conclusion," one of them said gently. I looked at the stack but didn't touch it. "I have a question," I said. They nodded like teachers allowing a student to speak. "Which part of your conclusion includes her voice?" Silence. They exchanged glances. One of them answered, "We reviewed all available information." "That's not what I asked," I said calmly. "Where is her voice?" Another pause. One of them shifted in their seat. Another adjusted their pen. They weren't used to questions like that. They moved on quickly, hoping momentum would save them. They talked about reputations. About damage. About how public misunderstandings can hurt innocent people. That word, innocent, was carefully chosen. Then they made their offer. Not officially. Not directly. But it was there. They suggested support. Transfers. Quiet solutions. A way to move forward without unnecessary attention. They were offering silence in exchange for comfort. I leaned forward. "Let me be clear," I said. "I didn't come here to negotiate silence." The room tightened. One of them smiled, but it didn't reach their eyes. "We're just trying to protect everyone involved." "Everyone?" I asked. "Or yourselves?" That's when the tone changed. The calm thinned. The patience cracked. They warned me, gently, indirectly, about consequences, about how systems respond when challenged. They wanted me to feel alone. They didn't know I had already made peace with that. I reached into my bag and placed something on the table. Not the device itself. A transcript. Printed. Time-stamped. Clear. The sound of paper hitting the table echoed louder than any raised voice. "This," I said, "is her voice." No one touched it. No one spoke. They stared at it like it might explode. One of them finally said, "Where did you get this?" I met their eyes. "That's not the important question." Another voice, sharper this time. "You can't just bring something like this without context." "Oh," I said softly. "There's context." I slid another page forward. Then another. Dates. Times. Exact words. I watched their faces as they read. Confidence drained. Control slipped. This meeting was supposed to end me. Instead, it exposed them. They tried to regain control by delaying, calling for reviews, suggesting further internal discussion. I stood up. "We're done here," I said. They looked startled. "You can't just leave," someone said. "I can," I replied. "And I will." I paused at the door. "One more thing," I said without turning around. "You don't decide when this ends." I walked out with my head high, my hands steady, and my heart clear. Behind me, they sat in a room full of rules that suddenly felt very fragile. They had tried to control the meeting. Instead, they lost control of the story. And once a story escapes, it doesn't come back. The truth begins to spread. Truth doesn't arrive loudly. It spreads. Quietly at first. From one conversation to another. From one doubt to the next. After that meeting, I didn't say anything publicly. I didn't post. I didn't accuse. I didn't chase attention. I waited. Because when people feel pressure, they talk to each other before they talk to you. And that's exactly what happened. I noticed the shift in small ways. Familiar faces stopped avoiding me. Someone nodded instead of looking away. Another whispered, "I'm glad you spoke up," as they passed. Those words mattered. Not because they supported me, but because they admitted something had been wrong. My daughter sensed it too. "They're looking at me differently," she said one morning. "How?" I asked. "Like they're thinking," she replied. I smiled softly. That meant the story was no longer controlled. Soon, questions started appearing where certainty used to live. "Did you hear what happened? Is it true there's a recording? Why are they suddenly changing rules?" The same people who once dismissed my concerns were now cautious, careful with their words, curious instead of confident. Curiosity is dangerous to lies. I received messages from people I had never spoken to before. Some were short. Some were emotional. Some simply said, "This happened to us too." I read every one. And with each message, the picture became clearer and heavier. This wasn't an isolated moment. It was a pattern. A system that had learned silence was easier than accountability. One message stayed with me longer than the rest. "We tried to speak once. It didn't end well." That sentence carried fear. But it also carried hope. Because now they weren't alone. I responded carefully. I didn't promise anything. I didn't push. I simply said, "Your voice matters." That was enough. Behind closed doors, things were shifting faster than I expected. Suddenly there were reviews. External eyes. New procedures announced like they had always been planned. People who once spoke confidently now spoke cautiously. That's how you know power is moving. I was called again, not officially this time. A phone call. A softer voice. A different approach. "We understand your concerns better now." Better. Not fully. Not completely. But better than before. I listened without responding. Let silence do the work. They spoke about improvements. Training. Oversight. All good words. But I was waiting for one thing. Responsibility. It didn't come. Not yet. My daughter asked me one night, Did we win? I thought about it carefully. Not yet, I said. But we're not losing anymore. She nodded, satisfied. Children understand progress better than adults sometimes. As days passed, the tension shifted. It wasn't aimed at me anymore. It was internal. People started asking themselves questions. What if this comes out? What if more people speak? What if the truth is bigger than we thought? Those questions travel fast. And once they start moving, they don't stop. I saw fear again, but this time it wasn't directed at me. It was directed at exposure. At the idea that silence was no longer safe. That protecting the system might cost more than fixing it. One afternoon, I received a message that made me sit down. We need to talk. Not to negotiate. To acknowledge. That word, acknowledge, meant everything. It meant the truth had moved beyond me. It was out there now. Breathing. Waiting. And it was no longer asking for permission. The truth had begun to spread. And the more it moved, the harder it became to stop. There's a moment in every cover-up when it breaks. Not slowly. Not quietly. But all at once. You don't always see it coming, but when it happens, you know there's no way back. That moment came on an ordinary day. No announcement. No warning. Just a message that changed everything. We're releasing a statement. I read it twice. Then a third time. They weren't asking anymore. They were preparing. The truth had grown too large to hide. Too many questions. Too many voices. Too many eyes watching. I felt calm when I read it. Not relief. Not victory. Clarity. They called me in again, but this time the room felt different. Smaller. Tighter. The confidence that once filled it was gone. No speeches this time. No rules. Just words that had been avoided for too long. We failed, someone said. The room went still. Not mistakes were made. Not communication issues. Failed. They acknowledged the injury. The silence. The pressure placed on a child to stay quiet. They didn't use names, but they didn't deny it either. That was the moment. The one they couldn't undo. Because once failure is admitted, control is lost. I asked one question. Will this be on record? They nodded. Yes. That single word felt heavier than everything else combined. The statement went out later that day. Carefully written. Still protected. Still limited. But it said enough. Enough for people to connect dots. Enough for others to speak. Enough to confirm what many had suspected but never proven. Messages flooded in. Some angry. Some relieved. Some grateful. And some full of pain that had been waiting years for acknowledgement. I didn't respond to most of them. Not because they didn't matter, but because this moment wasn't about me. It was about truth finally standing in the open. My daughter sat beside me as I read the statement out loud. They said they were wrong, she said quietly. Yes, I replied. Does that mean it's over? I looked at her and shook my head gently. No, I said. It means it's begun. Because acknowledgement is only the door. What comes after is accountability. And accountability makes people uncomfortable. That night I realized something important. They weren't afraid of the recording anymore. They were afraid of what it had unlocked. Because once one truth is proven, others come looking for daylight. The moment they admitted failure, they lost the ability to control the story. From that point on, they could only respond to it. And that changes everything. I went to sleep that night knowing something irreversible had happened. Not just for us. For everyone who had been told to stay quiet. The moment they couldn't undo had arrived. And nothing would ever be the same again. Justice doesn't shout. It speaks when the noise fades. After the statement was released, there was a strange pause. Like the world had taken a breath and was holding it. People were waiting to see what would happen next. So was I. This time things moved differently. Slower. More carefully. With witnesses, not whispers. With records, not promises. Independent reviews were announced. Not quietly, publicly. People outside the system were invited in. Questions that were once dismissed were now written down and answered. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But honestly. That mattered. For the first time since this began, I felt something loosen inside my chest. Not the anger. Not the pain. The weight. My daughter noticed it before I did. You're breathing different, she said one evening. I smiled. Maybe I am. She leaned against me. I feel lighter too. That's when I understood something important. Justice isn't just about consequences. It's about safety returning. People began reaching out again, not in fear but in trust. Some thanked me. Some apologized. Some admitted they should have spoken sooner. I didn't judge them. Silence grows in fear. Truth grows in courage. Both take time. Those responsible were removed from positions of control. Not dramatically, not publicly shamed, but firmly. Policies were rewritten. Not as decorations but with real changes. Reporting systems were made clear. Children were told something they should have always known. You can speak. And you will be heard. When my daughter heard that, she squeezed my hand. They said it to everyone, she whispered. I nodded. That's how it should be. The final meeting came weeks later. Smaller. Quieter. Real. This time no one tried to control it. They spoke plainly. Took responsibility. Promised follow-through. And invited oversight to ensure it. I asked only one thing. Make sure this never depends on one voice again. They agreed. And I believed them, not because they said it but because they knew they would be watched. That's what justice does. It doesn't erase the past, but it protects the future. As we walked out of that building for the last time, my daughter stopped and looked back. They look smaller now, she said. I followed her gaze. They weren't smaller. They were accountable. And accountability has a way of changing how power looks. That night, I tucked her into bed and sat with her until she fell asleep. Peacefully. Without fear. Before she closed her eyes, she asked one last question. Did telling the truth matter? I kissed her forehead. Yes, I said. It mattered more than anything. Because the truth didn't just expose what was wrong. It gave justice a voice. And once justice speaks, silence no longer wins.